Hello. In our previous video, we looked into what? We looked into modeling a base model, which is basically a model that does what? That provides the common attributes and methods of other single class in its own class, right? So this is our base model. And let's check if our code is still working. So we do Python 3 base model. And yes, everything is still in check. And right now in this video, we'll move straight to creating our file storage, which is just basically another class that can help us persist our data in our database. So this is our file storage. So this is the concept I'll be following, right? So it says we should write a file storage class that has a private class attribute and a private object and a public instance attribute methods. So you get to see what all of these are in a short while. So just come with me. So basically we just do class and we call it what? File storage, right? Then we'll have, let me just copy this. We'll have the file path. I will explain what they will be doing in a while. So we'll have file path, which will be what? Which will be file.json, and we'll have the object, which is going to be a dictionary. So what is this file path and object? So this file path is just the path to our database, which is our file storage, and it's file.json. And why we made it a private class attribute is basically, and it's called encapsulation, right? So we're trying to abstract the implementation of the object and the file path away from the users, right? So it's kind of like a security. So then we'll also have the object, and you see what this object will be doing for us and why in a short time. So after that, we have what? We have a public instance method, which is all. So this all returns the dictionary for us. The dictionary is currently empty, but we're populating the dictionary using what? Using the new method. So first of all, let's just call the all method, so self, and we just do return self dot objects, right? And this all is like a getter because we need a way to access this object, but because it is a private class attribute, we don't want to access it outside of the class. We are violating the law of program Python, which is what we are consenting adults. You should not access private class attribute or instance attribute outside of the class, and I have a video about how to go about it if you want to access it outside of the class. So you can check in my channel and see video in regards to that. So aside from that, after returning the object, what can we do? We have to construct a key. So in our previous video, we did something a little different in the sense that we had everything modeled in this base model, right? The serialize and the serializing method. But now in our file storage, we'll be doing something different because the file storage is now abstract from this base model. So we need a way to communicate with this base model whenever we need to get an instance of the base model, right? So that way we need what? We are creating the new method. And this new method is going to do what? This new method is going to have a key. So we're going to provide a key. So how do we construct a key? We have this and we do. So we have to pass self in here and what? Obj. So look at it, we have to pass self and obj. What is this obj? This obj is the model that we want to interact with, which is basically we have only one model now, which is what? Which is the base model. Is it making sense? So after that, we have to just do what? We have to do obj dot underscore underscore class underscore underscore dot name underscore underscore dot what? Dot obj dot id. Then after that, let's do what? Let's print the key. Is it making sense? So we are saying construct the key using what? Using the class that we pass to it. So we're going to be passing an instance over here when we call this new method, right? So let's just basically instantiate our file storage. So we call it storage. And now let's do what? Let's call the new method so you can see what I'm saying. So what are we going to pass inside of this new method? If we run it now, it's going to give us exception, missing one required positional argument, obj. Perfect. So what can we pass now? We're going to pass this model inside of it. So we pass model. So what will happen? It's going to create a key using this model name and what? And this model ID, which is the ID over here. Is it making sense? So let's clear our terminal now. and run our code again. Yes, so can you see base model? See, and what? And this. So let me just put right up over here so we can know this is what. So just say key. So can you see key? So this base model and the ID. So that is what this new method will be doing for us. Then after that, we have to do what? We have to store the object somewhere. And where is the place? This underscore objects, which is a private class attribute, right? So how can we access it? We're going to do self dot underscore object is equal to what? Is equal to obj. And I think you understand what we are doing here. So we are saying what? We are saying inside of this object, we want to what? We want to assign, so we have to pass a key over here. And if you remember how we did this in our previous video, introduction of the serializing and deserializing part. So this is basically saying what? Get this on object that is empty, assign a key to it, which is this key that we created. And where is the key coming from? The key is coming from the instance of this base model name and what? And also the ID. So assign it over here and pass this whole object into what? Into the objects, which is this dictionary, right? And after that, let's just print. Okay, you know what? Let's not print. Let's call the new method and do what? So if we want to see what is inside of this object, what can we do? We have to call this all method, right? To see what is inside of this object. So we now say all obj is equal to storage dot all. Then we say print or obj. Are you following? So first off, let me take this off now and see what will be the output of the all obj. So look at the all obj at this instance is empty. Is it making sense? But now if we put this back and run again, watch what will happen. So can you see the all objects now? The objects which was returned using this all method. So can you see it now has what? It now has a key and an entry. What is the entry? The entry is the whole what object, which is what? This base model. You're seeing it right now, right? So base model object at the memory address. Is it making sense? So we are passing the whole object into this what? Into this dictionary. And we'll be using it to what? We'll be using it to dynamically create, persist, and do a lot of things, right? So this kind of makes sense. So we are not persisting a raw dictionary as we did in our previous video. So we are trying to get the object so that we can be able to serialize and also deserialize back. So that's why we are assigning it this way. So in this case, if we call this dictionary now and pass the base model as a key, it's going to create an instance of that base model. Is it making sense? Come with me. So after that, what can we do? We have to call the save method, right? So let me just copy the save method. And what can we now do? This is save method does what? We will use it to serialize the object and persist in our file storage. So we're going to use this save method to persist our objects in our file storage, right? So how can we do that? We've done this before, right? It's just common steps. So what we can basically do is, we know that this object is in here. Is it making sense? The model is stored in this object, right? So for us to access this object, what can we do? We can now say serialized obj is equal to what? Is equal to an empty dictionary. So this is that small dictionary that will be persisted into the database, right? Are you following what I'm saying? So this is the big dictionary. So we'll be creating another small dictionary, sorry. So this is the big dictionary, and we'll be creating another small dictionary from this object. So what can we now do? We can now say for k and v in self dot objects dot items. Let's print k and v so you can basically see what k and v is. So let me say k and print v. So if we call this save method over here and we do storage dot save. So now let's print and see the output of our save method, right? So if we come over here and we do this, and watch what just happened. So remember that we are iterating inside of this object, right? And look at it, self.object. And this object just had this base model inside of it, which is the address of this base model. And that address is what? Is the value. And this is the key of what? Of this object. But now, what when we printed K, it gave us what? It gave us this base model, quite appropriate, which is what we expected. But now when we printed V, it did what? It gave us something like this. Why didn't it give us this main base model object? Because obviously that's the V. That's the value of what? Of this key. It gave us what? It gave us this in this format. Do you understand my question? So why is it not giving us this main base model object, which is the value, but it's giving us a string representation of this value? Why? So it's very, very straightforward. What is happening is that this base model is also same thing as what? It's also same thing as this model over here. Are you getting what I'm saying? It's also this model over here. So if we do not have this string representation and print this base model, it's going to give us the memory address. But because we have this string representation of it, anytime we put a print in it, what is it going to give us? It's going to give us a string representation of it, and not what? And not the address. So that is what is also happening over here, because we are putting a print over an object, and that object is what? This object in the memory address, and this object memory address, right? So whenever we put a print inside of here, instead of Python interpreter to print that object memory address, it's going to check the class, and the class has an str method. So what happens? It just calls the str method for us. Is it making sense? So now, if we actually come over here and take away this magic method underscore str, what do you think will happen? Let's run our code again and see. So do you see? It's no longer giving us the string representation. It's just giving us the memory address. And look at it. So this is 3050 and this is 3050. So you can kind of see that this V over here is what? Is also this instance over here. So that is what? 350 and 50. You understand? So that means if we manipulate this V, we are also manipulating what? This model over here, right? So I just really need you to understand how it really works. Makes sense, okay? So let's uncomment this str back and run our code again. And yeah, we're back to our previous code, which is the K and the V, the key and the value. I just kind of like calling it K and V. So we'll come over here to our save method. What do we now have to do? We have to basically do what? We have to basically construct this, because this, if you remember, this what is just a string representation, right? So we need to convert it to dictionary before we can persist it in our bigger dictionary. So how can we do that? We could just basically say serialize obj at index k. So we are saying what? Get this k, which is this, put it in the serialize obj and assign what? Assign the value of v to it. And yes, we get the serialized obj. And after that, what can we do? We could basically do what? Dump it in our file storage. So we say self.__file path, and we are making use of right, and we say as file. Then we just basically do json.dump. And what are we dumping? We are dumping the serialized obj. We are dumping it into the file, and let's do indent of 2. Simple. Is it making sense? So now if we run this code, what do you think will happen? And let's run and see. And yes, we are having what? Having an error saying object of type base model is not just serializable. And what does that mean? It's very, very straightforward. What is happening is that we are basically passing an object. What object is that? We are passing an object of base model, which is this instance over here. That's what it's saying. Base model, object of type base model is not just serializable. So we are passing the raw object what as a value to this dictionary. And when we pass it over here, we try to serialize the value here. And now JSON cannot be able to what? To serialize it. It just echoes an error. So let me show you. If we just print over here and print serialize obj, and let's pass something like this. So where I'm taking my time is so that you can understand very well. So we'll do serialized obj. I need to understand every single step we're taking. So let's uncomment this out first and kind of clear and run our code again. So can you see what we are passing inside of the serialized obj? So can you see the serialized obj is still having the same thing as what? As what this object has. So can you see it? So the serialized OBJ, this is the current value at this instance. So because we are having this current value as this instant, what can we now do? We can basically now say what? You know what? Call the toDict method on what? On the V. So that this V will basically be converted into what? Into dictionary representation. Right? So now we'll now say V dot toDict. And yes, if we run this code again, you now see that the output is going to change from this to dictionary representation. And let's run the code again. So can you see now? So this is the serialized OBJ. It has the key and the value as a dictionary. Makes sense, right? So now we can now do what? We can now persist it into our database. So let's take this off and now run our code, and good and fine. We are now perfect. And if we check our DB, and yes, we now have our entry in the database. So do you really understand how this file storage is working? So we are getting what? We are getting the object, which is basically what? Which is basically this model, and we are doing what? And we are calling the toDict method on it, and we are converting it to dictionary and appending it into this serialized OBJ, and we are doing what? We are pushing it into our file storage. It's gonna make sense, right? So now what is remaining for us is just basically for us to reload back the object from the file storage and recreate an instance from it again. So we're going to recreate that same instance. What do I mean by recreate that same instance? We're going to recreate a base model instance that has an ID of this particular ID, created at of this particular and updated at of this particular value. Is it making sense? So the values are not going to change because we are creating another instance. So that's what I'm telling you. We have to load and reload. So we are going to create an instance that has the same what? The same attributes over here. It's making sense, right? So that's what we're doing in the reload method. But now the reload method is going to take a little bit of logic over here because we need to find a way to dynamically know the attributes. To dynamically know what? Keep track of those attributes so that when we are recreating it, we're going to do what? We're going to still recreate that same instance. Are you understanding what I'm saying? So how can we do that? It's very straightforward. What we can basically do is we can say what? Okay, you know what? Let's go to our base model and say what? And say, let's pass a quarks over here. And what is quarks? Quarks is just what? It's just a dictionary, right? So we are saying if quark, so we're going to do if quark, we are saying what? Iterate inside of that quark and get the value of that quark. So look at it, for k and v in quark dot items. So you see what I'm saying? And let me print k is equal to k and v is equal to v. Let me say value, right? And what is this? This is saying allow the init method to take in limitless amount of what? Of keyworded what? Arguments. Limitless amount. That is what this quark is all about. And how can we do that? We could just basically come over here and grab this dictionary and come here in our base model. So now what we can do is we can create a dictionary and say dic is equal to and paste the value we copied. And now we have to take away this class. So I will explain why we are taking it off. And we do what is called the dictionary unpacking. What does that mean? It means take every single value in here and pass it them one after the other inside of this base model, right? So I mean, we could basically do ID is equal to and pass the ID, but it's kind of like a long process and a tedious task, right? So we can just use dictionary unpacking to take every single value in here and pass them one after the other, right? So how can we do unpacking? We could just put the double asterisk and do dic. So right now we are saying take every single attribute in here and pass as single attribute inside of this base model, right? So what does that mean? It means we are creating a new base model, but the attribute that that base model is going to have is still going to be the same attribute as if it was created just now with this attribute. So you know that if we call this base model, it's going to create a new ID every single time we run our code, right? But now we are saying don't create a new ID. You know what? Just take this ID and insert them inside of here as what? As the ID and the created at and the updated at. It makes sense, right? Because we are trying to what? We are trying to create that base model again from the values we got in here. Because they are going to be unique. Why so? Why is that before we added this base model into our file storage, we did some manipulation on the base model, right? Such as adding the key, converting the created at into ISO format, and also adding a class to the model. And when we are deserializing, we expect to get this exact type of of instance. I don't know if it's making sense. We expect that when we deserialize, we should get the same values that was in the object before we serialized it. So that is what we are trying to do, what we are trying to accomplish right now. So after that, we can basically run our code. And if we run our code, where is my terminal? If we run our code, it's going to fail. Definitely, it's going to tell us self.id, object has no attribute self.id. And what does that mean? It means that this object, which is this model over here, has no ID. But we passed an ID over here. Why is it now echoing an error? So the problem is that when you're working with Quag, we need to what? We need to dynamically set those attributes. So this attribute, we need to dynamically set it on the instance. What is the instance? This model over here. And how can we dynamically set attributes on an object? We can call what? We can call this set attribute. And the set attribute takes three parameters, which is what? Which is the self, the key, and what? The attribute and the value of the attribute. So this is the key and this is the value. And right now, if we run our code, we should expect to what? To see an instance created with this what? This attribute. Makes sense, right? And now if we clear and run. Perfect. Perfect. So can you see our base model created? So let me show you. So let me come over here and put a leprom and say reloaded base model. So if we run again, so can you see reloaded base model? It has an ID of E6 and this ID of E6. If we keep running it, it keeps giving us E6. Look at E6, 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 E6. Is it making sense? So it's not giving us a new instance at every single run. You know that if we run this our application every time, we should create a new attribute. So it's not giving us a new ID. It's just doing what? It's just making use of this ID every single time we run the application, because that is what we are telling our init method to do. We are saying if there is a Quag, do what? Don't run this code. Just make use of this. Make use of the value provided in the Quag to what? To create this instance. So that is what is called what? Deserialization. We are trying to what? We are trying to rebuild our instance back again to its previous state before we serialized it. Is it making sense? And we are good now. So knowing how this works, we can basically do what? We can basically take this out, take this off, and go back to what? And go back to our file storage. So right now in our file storage, we can now do what? We can now create our reload method, because we've created this what's it called? This Quag that helps us to do what? That helps us to reload our attributes back to what? That helps us to reload our instance from what it was constructed to inside of the DB back to the original instance, right? So we can now come over here and create the reload method. So we can now say def reload self. So how can we reload from this file storage? We need to what? We need to read from the file storage, obviously. So we just copy this, paste it in here, and we have to change this from dump to load, and just take off these boys. Then we have to assign it to what? We have to assign it to a variable. And if we assign it to a variable, how then can we now reload? That is the problem. Because we need to dynamically know the type, know the name of the class that we are reloading, obviously. Because we want to create an instance of what? Of that class dynamically. But now we don't know the instance. So what can we do? We can be what? We can be creative And how can we be creative? That is why we added what? We added an underscore class over here that has what? That has the name of what? Of the class. So we can kind of make use of this to know what? To know that this is the type of what? Type of class that is inside of our database. So that we can dynamically create that class back using what? Using these attributes over here. Is it making sense? Perfect. So we can now come over here and we have to iterate inside of the content, obviously. So we look for K and V in content dot items. So what can we do after that? We can now say what? We can now say get the value of K, right? When get the value of the key underscore class. So we can now do K is equal to what? So you can do class name is equal to V is equal to K. Is it K, right? Underscore name. Out. Sorry, underscore class. Underscore class. So now let's call our reload method. So we do storage dot reload, right? So we are saying what? Print class name. So we are saying let's see the value of this what? Of this underscore class. Is it making sense? So for our name again, our code again. I used to forget every single day. So we changed from write to read. Sorry, this should be V, right? Value. Yeah. So can you see base model? Are you seeing it? Base model. So the value is what? Base model. So we can kind of use this value that we get now and know that what? We are trying to deserialize a base model class. But now, how can we deserialize the base model class? How can we instantiate a class? We can now do this. We can now say instance is equal to what? Is equal to base model. I mean, we can basically do that. But what is going to happen here is that this is going to actually work right now. But how about when we have different types of models or different types of classes inside of our database? When we start having user, amenities, places, every other class inside of our database, how can we determine the type of class? We can't. Right now, we are passing base model in here because we know that we only have base model, right? So we need to devise a mean. So what does that mean? We could basically come over here and say what? And say classes is equal to this, and we'll pass what? We'll pass the class that we have, and we say base model, right? So you will see how we can do this. So we are saying let the key of this dictionary be the what? Be the object of what? Base model. Be the base model itself. So let the value of this key be the base model itself. So using this, we can instantiate this base model dynamically, and we can go over here and we take this off and come here and say if class name in self dot classes. So we are saying if the class name that we got from the deserializing our file storage is inside of these classes, then what? Instantiate what? Instantiate that what? That class. Makes sense, right? So how can we instantiate? We could basically say if class name is in self dot classes, we can say instance is equal to what? Is equal to self dot classes, and we're going to pass what? We're going to pass the class name and we call it. Is this making sense? So we are calling it dynamically using the dictionary that we mapped over here. So we passed what? We passed the key, and we called it. So we are dynamically calling what? We are dynamically calling the class because we don't know the class. So what we can basically do is that we're going to map every single class that we create in this dictionary. Is it making sense? And right now, if we print our instance, we should expect to see what? We should expect to see this instance printed as what? As printed the string representation of the instance that we created, right? So now let's print. Perfect. So let me come over here and say reloaded instance, right? I think I should just take away every other print that we have. Let me search for prints. Okay. So we can visualize what we're doing, and I think we're good for now. Okay, yeah. So we are only printing the reloaded instance right now. And let's run our code again. And perfect, reloaded instance. So can you see, we've dynamically created an instance of base model using what is inside of the file storage. And this is 5112. So, okay, this is going to be the recent one, obviously. So it will be different from what is inside of here. And remember how we fixed it in the previous video, right? So I think we are good. Now, we're good. So what can we now do? We can basically come over here and take this little boy and put it on the top and say what? You know what? Reload first of all before what? Before we call the save method. And we've come here and run our code again. So this is CA3, which was what was inside of this database previously. So this is 66, right? So if we run our code now, we expect to see 66. 3A0. So we are getting something wrong, obviously. So while we're getting something wrong, we still need to do one more step. And what is the step? What is the step? So what is happening right now is that we are actually creating a new instance. And that is not what we want. We want to create a new instance based off the value or based off the attributes or properties that we got from our database. And that is what we did in the base model over here when we did a dictionary unpacking, right? So that is why it's giving us a different value. So we can now come over here and do what? And unpack the V. Because the V is what? Is this whole data over here, this ID created as updated and class, right? So if we now unpack it, it will rush straight and call this what? And call this code that we have over here. And this code is going to do what? It's going to set it to what? To this model over here. Sorry, this instance over here that we are creating. Is it making sense? Perfect. So let's run our code again. And we have an error. And I was expecting this error. So you're saying what? Type error class underscore class must be set to a class, not str. And what is this saying? So if you notice, we are getting errors and we're debugging it together. Makes sense, right? So what is this saying? It is saying that the instance, okay, if I'm being honest, what it's actually saying is that this underscore class must be set to a class, not str object. Right? So what is it saying? It's saying that in your reloaded properties, I saw an attribute called underscore class that is a string. But it's meant to be what? It's meant to be a class and not an str object. Are you following what I'm saying? So that's the error it's echoing now. But how can we fix this error? We can fix this error because we are trying to construct an exact properties and the exact attributes that class had before we persisted it in our file storage. And if you remember, when we first created the instance does not have an underscore str underscore class name word property in the instance. So that means when we are trying to deserialize, we're meant to take it off of the instance before we actually deserialize properly, right? So we can actually come over here and say what? And say if the key is equal to what? Is equal to underscore class. Don't add it what? Don't add it to what? To the instance. Just pass. That's what I mean by continue. Continue your iteration. Move past it. Don't do anything at that instance. So that we are now what? We are not taking away the class, the underscore class that we added where we serialized. Because deserializing means getting back the object in its exact form before you serialized it. And when we created the object, first of all, it did not have anything like underscore class in it. So now we are what? We are deserializing back again, so we need to take it off. Makes sense, right? And now if we run our code, we're going to have another error. So now it's out of the database. The underscore class is now out. So now we created what? We now created our instance. But we still have an error, don't worry. I will show you the error. So now it's 38D. And if we check our database, 43. So if we run again, we expect to see 43. So we are seeing 43. But we have a problem. What is the problem? The problem is that this is not actually perfect right now, because it is now what? It is still overwriting the previous data that we had in our dictionary, right? So it's still overwriting the previous data. Look at it. It's overwriting every single time. And that is why I tell you that we will still encounter an error. It's overwriting. Can you see? It's overwriting. So we need what? We need a way to persist it, so that what? Anytime we run again, it should obviously come over here and append and not overwrite. Is it making sense? So how can we do that? Very straightforward. We could just basically come over here and do what? And call the self.obj again and say what? Get the key, assign back what? Assign back the instance to it. Are you following? Because remember that was what we did here. We got the key and assigned the object back to it. So now we are saying, after doing this thing, any instance that you get, assign it back to this key, so that to this object, so that this object is going to have double entry. Look at where is the object, so that this object is going to have double entry, so that when we try to save again, it has double entry. So that means we are going to what? We are going to convert those two dictionary over here using the save method before we persist into the dictionary, right? So if we basically return and we call the OR method here, so let's print the OR method again, or obj. So let's take this off for now and see the output. Let me add a prompt, or obj, right? And I come over here. So look at the or obj. The or obj has one entry, which is just this before and the base model. But now watch what will happen if I come over here and paste back my boy and take off this save, because it's going to throw an error. I want to show you something before it throws an error. And let's run again. Watch what will happen. The or obj should have double entry. So base model it still has one entry. Okay, which means I still have to. Okay, yeah, I still have to call this, so that's making sense. So yes, I still have to uncomment this so that it creates a new object for me, obviously, but it's going to raise an error, definitely. And what is the error? It's saying what? To JSON created at is equal to JSON created at ISO format. str object has no attribute ISO format. Did you mean format? And what is this saying? It is saying what? Look at what is happening over here. I love explaining what is actually happening so that you can understand. What is actually happening is that at this instance, we are working with this data coming from this Quag code, right? And now this Quag code at this instance has what? Has the created art coming from this dictionary. And if you remember that the created art coming from this dictionary is what? Is a string, right? And now that string is what we passed over here, and we are coming to this toDict method. And in this toDict method, we are calling the .iso format on a string. An ISO format method and string does not have a method called ISO format. So it's what? It's raising an error saying what? str object has no attributes ISO format. Because at that instance, the str, the time, which is the created art, is what? Is a string object and not a datetime object. So how can we fix that little problem? We could basically come over here and say, if created art, okay, you know what, let's be smart. Okay, let's say if kn created art, instead of doing it 1-1, and updated at, what can we do? We are saying if there is a key called created at and updated at, and we can say what? And that key is what? Is an instance of str. This is straightforward. If there is any key in the file storage called created at and updated at, and we are checking the key, and the key is what? Is an instance of str. What can we do? We can say v. What is the v? The v is what? Is the value of what? Of that created at. We are saying what? V is equal to v dot I. We are saying v dot from. Sorry, we are going to say date time dot from ISO format v. So what are we saying? We are saying if there is any key in our dictionary and that key is created at or updated at, and it is an instance of a string, get the value. What is the value? The value is this over here. And do what? And convert it from ISO format. Remember that we converted to ISO format in here, which is going to convert it to string. And now we are saying convert back to what? Datetime object. That is what basically what? From ISO format. And assign it back to v. And do what? And append it back to what? To our instance. So now we've converted it from str to what? To datetime object. And now if we run our code again, it's not going to fail. Is instance. It says what? Is instance expected to argument? Okay. Yeah, it is expected to argument. So it's expected this and k. Yeah. So and the k is an str. So that's it. Perfect. If we run our code again, perfect. So can you see it's no longer echoing that error? And if we check our file storage now, it's what? It's appending them. It's appending them. That is the whole logic in this project. That is the whole logic in this project. We what? We serialized and we deserialized. We converted to JSON format and now we are converting it back to what? To our object. And that is what basically every single thing that we did here. And now if I come here and say print model dot created at, let me just print the type. Any problem? Print. If I print the type now, so look at it, class datetime dot datetime, making sense, right? But now, if I take off this, and yeah, if I take off this and say pass, so we are not converting anything right now. So now I don't have to call the save method, so it does not throw an error. So if I would load now, wait, so that's wrong. If I come again, datetime dot datetime. So why? Okay, yes. The previous setup was datetime, so I have to call this save. So that's true. Oh my goodness, what am I doing? I was meant to work with this another. So I was meant to, so this is what I'm actually checking. So I'm meant to do type instance dot created at, sorry. Yeah. And if we run our code again, so you see it's str. Can you see it's str? But if I come over here and comment this label out now and run our code again, can you see it's now a datetime object? Can you see datetime object? Datetime object. Is it making sense? So that is what we basically did. By what? By converting them back to what? To datetime object. Makes sense, right? So now this is basically how the file storage actually works. I know it was quite a lot to take in, to digest. I understand. But you just have to like follow me and take it gradual process, and yes, we're done and we're good. So in our next project, or in our next video, we are going to be doing what we are going to be restructuring our project. So now it's just basically in one file. So in our next video, we're going to be what we're going to be restructuring it, and create models, create packages, and try to share all of these models, all of this code into different models, so that you can have like an organized structure of project directory, right? So thank you so much. That is all for the file storage. But before we go, let's verify that everything is working fine. Let's take out all the whole data and run again. Yeah, problem. So the problem arose from what? From the JSON decoder, which I actually showed you how to solve that in the previous video. So for now, we're going to just take it off and run again. Perfect. We have an entry, so we can now put back our JSON. And now our reload will have double entry. And in our next video, we will talk about how to treat this so that we don't have to keep taking it out when the data is empty and the first run. We have to fix that. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about the file storage, and catch you in this restructuring of this project. Thank you so much.